Seminole history goes back to the first people to enter Florida. The term Seminole originally comes from the Spanish term Cimarron, which is actually not a Spanish term. It was a borrowed word from the Taino people that referred to runaway herd animals. And the Spanish used this term to apply to two groups of people. They used it to refer to runaway slaves, and they used it to refer to the Native Americans who did not join in with the mission system, the ones who were not willing to work with the Spanish authority, as they thought of themselves. They called these people basically the runaways. And the term Cimarron, as it was used on the Seminole, it was used as Cimarron. The Creek up in the north, who were part of the same culture group as the people who were being called Seminole, started using the term to refer to the ones down in Florida, and they said it as Seminole. The Americans got the term from them and used it as Seminole. So it has absolutely nothing to do with the English word Seminole. It is a borrowed word from the Creek, where it was a borrowed word from the Spanish, where it was a borrowed word from the Taino. The same word also came to mean, when used to runaway slaves, got shortened from Cimarron to maroon, and that's where we got the term maroon for the free blacks and the black people living in Florida at the time. The Seminole were made of all these disparate groups. You had a large amount of Creek. You had people from the Alachua area who had been Creek back in the early 1700s. You had the Spanish Indians, who were a mix of the Calusa and Spanish, and some free blacks who had remained in Florida after Spain left. You had, and Seminole oral history speaks of full bands of the Calusa joining with them. The term that's often used is they joined their fires to ours. So this term just kept getting used. The people who are now the Seminole basically just adopted it, and these groups all kind of came together as this big conglomeration, and it just became easiest to refer to this Confederacy as Seminole. The Spanish did not start with a good working relationship with the Native people, as you can imagine, but by the time the Spanish left, it was actually pretty good. The Seminole were already heavy in the cattle raising tradition at this time, and they were the main suppliers of beef to the Spanish colony. They controlled a lot of the areas in the north, around the Panhandle, down through the Alachua area. By the time you get to the 1800s, there's kind of an understanding, for the most part, between the Spanish and the people who will become the Seminole. The problem you have is, coming from the north, you had a lot of people who saw this good ranch land, who saw this good farmland down in Florida in the southern United States, and they wanted to get this land. They wanted to get it from the Spanish. The first real incursion, and where we often look at the true start of the Seminole War, was called the Patriot War. And the Patriot War happened in 1811, and it was a group of militias from South Georgia and Alabama who tried to seize Florida from the Spanish government. They invaded, they moved down to try to take St. Augustine. In doing this, they confronted the Alachua group, and they basically demanded that they work with them. The Alachua Native people had absolutely no interest in doing this. As the War of 1812 is going on between the Americans and England, England comes to the Seminole and says, you don't like these guys either, right? So they actually help arm the Seminole in the area, trying to get them to help take war and fight in the Patriot War. It becomes this other front that helps split the war. Andrew Jackson first is seen coming down around this time. This leads into what is referred to by two names, the Creek Civil War or the Red Stick Rebellion. So this entire war is being fought right on the border. In the end, the Red Sticks are pushed down into Florida. They basically join and become part of the Seminole tribe. The main leader of this group that came down and joined with the Seminole was a man named Chipko. He was a war leader, but he was just basically at this point trying to get his people to a safe area. He brought a lot of refugees with him, which included the band that a 13-year-old boy named William Powell, who would later go on to fame as Osceola, was a part of that. So Osceola was actually born Creek. He came from that group that came down and joined with the tribe. The Seminole tribe was at war with America for 50 years. That leaves a mark on people. When we go to what's often called the First War, there's debate about what actually starts the First War and which battle is part of it, because a whole mess of circumstances happened around the same time. Traditionally, this period is broken into three separate wars. There is the First, Second, and Third Seminole War, and these are times that the United States military was actively engaged in fighting with the Seminole people. However, for the Seminole, there was one war. This war started around 1811 with the Patriot War and ended in 1858 at the end of what most historians refer to as the Third Seminole War. This is because for the tribe, during this entire time, they were still fighting. They were either fighting or they were hiding or they were trying to broker a peace. The war never really ended for them. For Americans, they would say it was different periods of war because this is when we sent in the military, but for the tribe, it didn't matter if the people who you were fighting were wearing uniforms or not. It was still a war. At the end of the Patriot War, when Britain was leaving, they'd set up a fort at this place called Prospect Bluff in the panhandle of Florida. They offered it to the Seminole and said, do you want this fort? And the Seminole said, no, we don't have any use for a fort. They then looked to the black Seminole allies and said, do you want this fort? And they said, why, yes, we would very much like this fort. They settled in the fort, and people lived there, including a man named Abraham, who was young at this time, who was an escaped slave from the Spanish originally. Over 300 people lived at this fort in Prospect Bluff. It became known throughout the South as the Negro Fort. It had two major repercussions. One, a good amount of slaves who were in the American South heard about this fort run by free black people, and this became a beacon of freedom. The word had gotten out that if you made it down to Spain, because Spain had outlawed slavery already, you would be free. That was Spanish law. You got across the border, you were free. This also became a nightmare for a lot of the slave owners who did not like this beacon of hope basically being out there for the enslaved population. Work started to try to do something about this fort to shut it down, and they talked about how this was a threat, how this many armed free black people was a threat to the United States. The American Navy sailed down. They opened fire on the fort from ships. What they called a hot shot, a heated cannonball, hit the fort and it hit the magazine where all the gunpowder was stored. Prospect Bluff exploded. Most of the people who were there were killed. America built a new fort there to try to basically cover up the legacy of this. Now, the other incident is looked at as the start of the war happened in southern Georgia, where the military was trying to enforce Jackson's rule on the creek that they had to give up their land. One person who refused to leave was the leader of a place called Foultown, named Neamathla. Neamathla was a Miccosukee. He did not consider himself a Creek. So when they came in and said that this deal was made, you have to leave, he said, that's the Creek, that's not us, we don't have to go anywhere. The military told him to get out, and he said no. The military then would show up and attack. They attacked Foultown and were initially rebuffed. The people, the warriors of Foultown were able to keep them out, and there was a lot of celebration, people were happy, and then the military returned with greater numbers and pushed them out of the area. The Battle of Foultown is looked at as another possible start of the war. So Neamathla is looking for retaliation for Foultown. His scouts find out that there's an American boat traveling along a river in their territory, transporting American soldiers. He and his people attack. They kill everyone on board. However, this boat didn't just include soldiers, it included wounded soldiers and included family members. When news of this gets out, it's reported as an Indian massacre. It goes through the papers throughout the South, into the north of America, as Neamathla attacks unprovoked, slaughters everyone on board. This becomes the impetus for popular support within America to go to war in Florida against the Seminole and the natives. So Andrew Jackson returns to Florida, riding this wave of popular support. He is sanctioned by the president to go down and stop these Indian attacks coming into Georgia and Alabama. He is not sanctioned to go into Florida. They do not want to risk provoking a war with Spain right now because America's a young country. They don't want to get involved in international affairs as much as they can. Andrew Jackson goes directly against orders and invades Florida. He burns down these towns, including Tallahassee and including Miccosukee. These are towns with thousands of people living in them. He then, once he's done this attack against the Seminole, which is what he was originally sanctioned to do, takes his troops and marches on Pensacola and claims Pensacola from the Spanish. He forces an international incident to claim Florida. So Spain and America have to come together. They agree to what is called the Adams-Onis Treaty, which agrees that Spain will grant Florida to America, and America will write off a significant amount of Spanish debt. So Spain leaves Florida, Andrew Jackson becomes the first territorial governor. The new government makes an offer to work with the Seminole, and the Seminole come together and agree that they need to do this. They know they're in a bad position at this point. They had a good understanding with Spain, but that does not exist with America, who just burned down a good number of their towns. In the end, they agree to what's called the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. The understanding the tribe has at this point is that they have 20 years to move to this reservation. The American government wants them to move there immediately, and the understanding on the American side is that they will be allowed to live here for 20 years. This is already a start of problems that are going on. There are multiple incursions. People on both sides of the treaty break it. Seminole try to remain in their area. Settlers try to move into the area that was set aside for the Seminole. Nobody likes this. So later on, Andrew Jackson becomes president of the United States. He pushes through the Indian Removal Act. He wants every Native American living east of the Mississippi River to be removed, to leave, and go to what will become Oklahoma, Indian Territory. He sends people down to negotiate with the Seminole. The Seminole already have been moved once. They don't want to be moved again. Negotiations break down. So the Seminole find out that a column of American military is marching from Fort Brooke down in Tampa up to Fort King up in Ocala, and that these men, these infantry and cavalry, are being prepared to go to war against the Seminole to force them to leave. The Seminole decide to strike first. A group of them prepare to attack this column while they're marching. At the same time, this group is attacking Major Dade's command, marching up from Fort Brooke. A smaller group, led by Osceola, attacks Fort King. These attacks happen almost simultaneously, even though they are roughly 100 miles apart. Micanopy fires the first shot. Kills Major Dade. Seminole remain behind cover, firing, and take out most of this column, which is marching down the road. In the end, only 2 people survive on the American side, one of which is a slave from one of the military leaders, who later on, evidence comes out that he may be the person who told the Seminole that this column was going to be marching forth. At the same time, Osceola leads a small group to attack Fort King. They kill the agent for Indian removal, who was stationed there, who was the one who had been pressing them to leave, to try to convince them to leave Florida. This happens simultaneously with the attack that comes to be known as Dade's Massacre. This is looked at as the start of the Second Seminole War. So Osceola is the most famous Seminole to come from this time. He is a household name now, but he was already famous in 1835, when this war begins. He was a charismatic speaker, and where many Seminole by tradition try to, at these negotiations, are being calm, they're not presenting much to the outside, Osceola shows his emotions. He is passionate, he talks. At Payne's Landing, when they demand signatures, he walks up to the treaty paper, takes out his knife, and stabs his knife through the treaty paper, saying, "That is the only signature you will ever get from me." So Osceola was born into the Creek tribe. His father had basically joined the tribe. He was a Scottish trader who had come down and was adopted into the tribe, married a Creek woman, and Osceola was a child. So Osceola grew up a Creek. Osceola is more equivalent to a captain or a lieutenant in the military. He's charismatic, he is skilled, but he's never a leader of the tribe. In fact, the Seminole tribe never has leaders. There's never been an actual chief of the Seminole tribe. Even now, the leader of the tribe is referred to as a chairman. The Seminole and the culture they come from, that was shared with the Creek and all these other groups, are a matriarchal society. They get their clan and their descendants from their mother, and the leadership role comes through the mother. But no one ever has the full authority to speak for the tribe. There's never someone who can tell another Seminole what they have to do. Much like the First War, the attack on Dade's column is referred to as the Dade Massacre, goes into the papers along with the attack on the Indian agent, who they talk about was a friend to the Seminole. That's not true, and suddenly there's public support for another war against the Seminole. So America is able to declare an action, they start sending troops in, and full war begins. General Jessup becomes the leader of the American military for the Second Seminole War. He is being pressured to make up for losses that the people he's replacing took. They want results from him. So during what Americans considered the Second War, the Seminole were still trying to live, and many of them were still trying to find areas away from the front to live in to get away from the war. One of these main areas was in Palm Beach County. Seminole families would come down, would set up camps down through Palm Beach, down into what would become Broward County. And these areas were kind of refuges away from the war. However, when the military found out that this was happening, they realized they needed to set up a second front. So the military moved down along the East Coast. They created Fort Jupiter, and they created Fort Lauderdale. They set up these areas to try to monitor the Seminole and try to place pressure to move them out of the area. General Jessup finds out that there is a Seminole camp not far from Fort Jupiter. He gets the location to the people there and orders them to attack. The army marches out on this location. The Seminole scouts find out about it as the army is moving and prepare a defensive fortification to try to intercept them while they are able to get the women, the children, and the elders out and into a safer area. They prepare the area. They cut down a lot of the trees and the brushage to make a spot that looks better for the army to move into. This area is full of cypress knees. They've got some spiked areas in it. This is all things that they did that had been done previously in the Battle of Okeechobee to prepare an area for the army to march into as a trap. They repeat this in what becomes the Battle of Loxahatchee. The army, however, is coming in with cavalry, with infantry, with Navy sailors brought in to increase the ranks. They're bringing artillery. They're preparing for a full military engagement. What they don't realize is they're going into this very wetland area near the river that the Seminole have time to prepare. The cavalry are the first ones, but the horses can't march through this territory, so the cavalry has to dismount and come in on foot. You have artillery wagons trying to move through a swampy area that is no good for them. You have sailors who, they might be used to boats, but they're not used to fighting on land or marsh or wetlands. So the army isn't properly prepared for this. The Seminole are incredibly prepared. Roughly 140 Seminole warriors are able to hold off over 10 times their number to allow people to escape before they break off themselves. For the American military, this is not what they were looking for. They've lost more troops than the Seminole did. They did not capture anywhere near as many people. They captured single-digit number of people. In their reports, they say that they drove the Seminole to retreat, and therefore this is a great victory. So between 1842 and 1855, there's an attempt to negotiate a peace between the Seminole and the American settlers. The prominent voice amongst the Seminole at this point is a man named Billy Bowlegs. American military has given the negotiation over to a man named Captain John Casey, who is named the Indian agent for the time. These two know each other from the war. They actually get along and consider each other friends and work together to try to show that the Americans and the Seminole can both live in Florida without having to go back to war. Captain Casey actually believes this and sort of campaigns on the tribe's behalf in Washington. However, the orders that come down from Washington, which are reinforced by a lot of the people of Florida, are that they want the Seminole gone. They are terrified of these people living in swamps, living in the wilderness, coming and attacking. There are still battles that happen in this time. At one point, a group of Seminole men break off and attack a frontier family and kill the entire family. The Seminole go out, track down these men who'd committed these murders, and bring them in to Tampa for justice. This is a surprise to everyone, showing this is working, and there's hope with Seminole. This shows that the two sides can live together. That's not how things end up. The orders come down. They are told to place pressure on the Seminole tribe to remove. They've learned lessons from the Second War that open warfare, open battle is not the best way to go. Instead of sending troops to attack, they send in troops to build forts in Seminole territory. They send in people to survey the land so that it can be parceled out to Americans. The tribe sees this. They see that people are coming in, they're taking the measurements. They know that this means that they're looking to claim the land. The idea is to put pressure on the tribe to either realize that there's going to be war if they stay, or that the tribe will have to start a war if they want to stay. During this time, a whole bunch of forts are built. One of them is Fort Shackelford. The remnants of it are currently on the Big Cypress Reservation. They build this close to the home camps of Billy Bowlegs and Abiaka. They don't know exactly where they are, but they're trying to put that much pressure on them. It is occupied by American troops for 3 months. They come in, they occupy the fort. Florida summer comes in, and a whole bunch of American soldiers from New York State suddenly realize what a Florida summer is like in their wool uniforms, and they abandon the fort. As soon as they abandon it, the Seminole come in and burn the fort down. Later on in the year, a patrol led by Lieutenant George Hartsuff is sent down to Fort Shackelford to determine if it's still usable. On the way, they find Billy Bowlegs' camp. Billy Bowlegs and his people are not in the camp at this point. They are either just not there, or they knew that they saw the troops coming and got out of there, so there wouldn't be a direct confrontation. Hartsuff's troops decide that they're going to destroy Billy Bowlegs' crops. They destroy the crops, and they continue on. They get to Fort Shackelford and find it burned to the ground. They make camp, and on the way back, Billy Bowlegs and his people attack. The destruction of the crops was basically the final straw. They attack Hartsuff and his troops. 3 men make it out alive, one of them including Hartsuff, who takes 2 bullets, ends up in a lake taking cover, takes 2 weeks to make it back to Fort Myers. This is much like the first 2 wars, this becomes the attack that gets into the papers to justify the Third Seminole War. America declares another war to remove the Seminole. Troops are sent in. A good amount of them are militia troops who sign up for this. Skirmishes take place, but the American officers learned lessons from the Second War that they don't want to do direct fighting with the Seminole warriors. They've also learned the lay of the land better. They're better equipped to go into the wetlands at this time. Instead of attacking the soldiers, they start hunting down the camps. The camps are left behind with the women and children and the elders. The American soldiers begin targeting these. They go in, they seize everyone they can, and originally they took them to a prison complex at Fort Myers. After that, they set up a full prison camp on Egmont Key, which is an island off the coast of Tampa. They took all the prisoners there to hold them and would basically send out messengers to the warriors that we have your family, they're going to be sent to Oklahoma, you should turn yourself in so you can be with them. This ended up being a very effective strategy. In the end, Billy Bowlegs and a good amount of people who followed him turned themselves in at Fort Myers and agreed to be taken. They were taken out to Egmont Key on a boat called the Gray Cloud. They met the people who were held there, and they were there for 1 night before they were taken off to New Orleans and then to the reservation in Oklahoma. On the Gray Cloud, Billy Bowlegs himself was interviewed by Elias Rector, who's the new Indian agent by this time, and he tries to ask him about any people remaining in Florida. Billy Bowlegs tells him that there are 3 groups remaining. One of them is Sam Jones' party, and Sam Jones and his people will never agree to leave. This proves true. Sam Jones leads the remaining people, the remaining Seminole in Florida, deep into the wetlands, into the Everglades. There's only 200 to 300 of them left, but he leads this corps to safety within the Everglades. He is the reason that the Seminole tribe of Florida still exists to this day.